Inside a castle, a man motions to a wolf's body lying by his feet, concluding his subjugation report for the day. The king sitting on the throne praises the man who was kneeling before him. The king is happy that the man had once again protected their nation from the magic beasts, and thus would ensure that they welcomed the new year in peace. He expresses how grateful he is to the man, who is known to the people as the hero of the holy sword. Well, a voice speaks to Well quietly, saying that the hero only had 1 year left until retirement and finally he would be able to take a breather. In their world there were magic beasts. Beasts that have spread across the continent, mutating violently from unknown causes. When an animal transforms into a magic beast, its body gradually enlarges, they become ferocious, and their skin becomes unnaturally tough. Normal weapons can't kill them. The people could do nothing but run and hide. But humans were eventually successful in cutting them down using holy weapons made from special ores. And from then on, nations formed around those who wielded these sacred arms. The Kingdom of Klenrad was protected by 2 sacred weapons, the Holy Sword Elsring and the Holy Lance Venzel. Eventually, New Year's Eve rolls around the kingdom. A plentiful feast is spread across the table as the king welcomes Well to the banquet made in his honor. Well sits at a table with the king at the head and a woman and 2 other girls. Well gives his thanks to the king as he's poured another glass of wine. Well's ordinary life was turned upside down 19 years back when he pulled out the Holy Sword Elsring. Oh, he got King Arthur'd. Tipsy and rather bashful, King Lordvat asks Well not to call him Your Majesty because he saw Well as a younger brother, even telling the hero to call him Big Brother. Also rather tipsy, Queen Filiacel reprimands the king, saying that he already had too much to drink and was making Well awkward. Meanwhile, the older one of the girls, the first princess and the saintess of the kingdom, Mariciel, praises Well for being amazing in his battle the day before. The youngest girl, the second princess Elisiel, immediately cuts in and asks to hear about his battle. Well found life too unpredictable. He never thought he'd be invited to celebrate the new year with the royal family. Damn, they even invite him every year. Brother is a guest of honor. Well, especially thought so as he came from a commoner background, was a single old man. 34 is not that old. Well, come on now, he's also never had a girlfriend, and he has no surviving family left to speak of. Even then, he still wasn't used to any of it. The night stretches on, and suddenly King Lordvat coughs to catch Well's attention. He tells him that there is good news. King Lordvat excitedly tells him that during the day at the hero selection ceremony, they were finally able to find someone, a new Holy Lance hero, to succeed Well. Well is just as easily excited, if not more excited to be quite honest, and he's almost unable to believe that they had finally managed to find someone to pull out the Holy Lance. Elisiel sings out joyfully that they were there themselves for the incredible moment. She turns to her sister for support, and Mariciel added that even the muscular knights of the order couldn't make the Holy Lance Venzel budge, but such a young boy was able to pull it out. Well laughs, saying that a sacred weapon doesn't accept strength alone, and it wouldn't choose someone unless they were worthy. Elisiel, confused, asks him to elaborate. Well starts to explain the concept of mana. In Well's world, all living things, humans, animals, fish, and trees. I had to include this part because it sounded like fish weren't recognized as animals, and I thought that was very funny. Carry on. All living things contain a life force called mana. Only by channeling mana through a sacred weapon can it cut through magic beasts. For example, the Holy Sword had a blade made from special ore. In its normal state, nothing can land a scratch on it, but otherwise it's just a fancy weapon. But with mana, one can infuse it with magic. Using a sacred weapon consumes a lot of mana, however. That's why in the kingdom they selected candidates based on whether they can pull out a sacred weapon. Well finishes off his explanation by saying that sadly mana wasn't visible to the eye. Elisiel says that she understood, summarizing Well's words, that a hero needed more than just strength, but he also needed mana's blessing. Queen Filiacel agrees with Elisiel, adding that those who could wield mana were very rare. The king adds that that was why they must show their gratitude to heroes, saints, and mages alike. Well smiles, touched at the king's kind words. Eventually, after they go through multiple bottles of wine, the king brings up talks about Well's retirement reward. Well spits out his drink rather harshly, as the king offers one of his 2 daughters, either Mariciel or Elisiel, asking which one he'd like to marry. Well argues that he wasn't worthy of that, but the king reasons for him not to be ridiculous and that he wasn't getting any younger. King Lordvat says that he needed a partner to keep up appearances. The king motions to the eldest of his daughters, first princess Mariciel Saintess, top healer of the kingdom, who was known to be graceful and well-mannered, and she smiles at him warmly. Look, we're not here to judge, but she's literally only 20 years old. That's all I'm saying. Lordvat reasons that Well's predecessor Marissa, the former Holy Lance hero, was only a commoner, but she also joined the royal family by getting married to the king's older brother. Well replies that the two had fallen in love naturally. The king continues that most citizens dreamt of marrying into royalty after becoming a hero. Well panics on what to say next, but he suddenly hears a voice heavily sigh in his head. It asks him if they were going to be doing the same thing all over again. It urges him to just give a proper answer already. Well clenches his fists, saying that he understood what the voice, who he calls Elsie, was trying to say. In the kingdom, many dreamt of becoming heroes. Lavish rewards, land, status, and marriage to noble beauties. In exchange for risking their lives fighting magical beasts, they were promised everything imaginable. But that wasn't quite what Well wanted. Finally finding his voice, Well calls Lord Vat Big Brother, which catches the king and the queen by surprise. Well admits that for him, both Mauriciel and Elisiel were like nieces to him, which is a completely valid point of view, but I don't think they liked that. Well carried on that for his retirement, all he asked for was just a modest pension and that would suffice. He adds that if they let him train the new hero into a worthy successor, he would be more than content. The king is quiet for a moment before finally he lets out a heavy sigh in resignation, saying that Well was always so serious, but he smiles fondly at him as he thinks how maybe that was why he really wanted to have Well marry into the family. Meanwhile, Mauriciel comes up to Well and offers him another glass of wine. The king was sure of himself that if ever Well decided to change his mind, his younger brother just needed to let him know. Later on, back in Well's room, he roughly collapses into his bed in the castle guest room, almost completely drunk. A voice comments how rare it is to see Well so drunk that it's never even seen him get that wasted. The voice seems to come from the sword leaning on the bedside table. It lets out a sigh, if it had a mouth anyway, but it seems to make the sound so, hey, we're not questioning it. The sword comments how Lord Vat gets way too pushy after drinking, but after a while it calms down enough to say that the king meant well. Still, the sword was known as Elsie, a spirit-like entity dwelling within the holy weapon. She was once human apparently, but somehow ended up in the sword. It was rather messy. If you were some soul stuck eternally in a sword, I'd imagine so. Hearing his thoughts, Elsie complains at how rude Well was being to her, saying that she still had a woman's heart. Well tries to argue that he could only hear her voice so he was fine, but Elsie tells him to shut up. Suddenly, Well lets out a small laugh and Elsie hesitantly urges him to speak. Well starts that although they've fought together side by side for 19 years, he's never seen her face. Elsie jokes that it was a shame since she knew every little thought in his head. Well complains and asks her to stop reading his thoughts without asking his permission first. Well questions if the next hero might be able to hear her as well, but Elsie is just as clueless as he is, since Well was the only one to ever hear her voice. Changing topics, Elsie happily says that at the very least Well finally had a successor. She makes it a point to set the talk of getting a bride aside, and Well awkwardly, but thankfully agrees. He says that between beast hunting and rookie training, his year was going to be packed. He leans back on his pillows with a content smile on his face. He only had 1 year left. He tells Elsie that he would be counting on her, and Elsie replies the same. As Well slowly loses consciousness, he hears the faint sound of footsteps, and suddenly, a woman screams, "Oh, nothing about this looks good." When he finally wakes up, he finds himself locked up in the dungeons. He breaks into a cold sweat, unable to understand what was going on. "Oh, this doesn't bode well at all for you, bro." Later in the day, crowds of people are gathered at the royal castle square, surrounding a large stone monument called the Pedestal of Slumber. The crowds are loud as the people talk amongst themselves. Suddenly a rock is thrown and hits Well as he's being escorted by royal knights. The man who threw it shouts that Well had been acting like a damn fool the moment the year began. Another man mocks him for getting drunk and assaulting the saintess, adding that it was low of him. Well stays quiet the entire time, even as his head bleeds and more people throw insults at him. He looks down at his cuffed hands and clenches his fists. So far, he's gathered that they were accusing him of attacking Mauriciel. Well is unable to imagine that he would do something like that. His thoughts are running wild as he climbs up the steps to the monument. He was asleep in the cell just a moment ago, for starters. He seriously had no clue what was happening. Suddenly he hears Elsie's voice telling him that he was innocent. His head whips around quickly to look for his sword and finds it in the hands of some pompous-looking man. I have a lot of words to say about how this guy looks, but we'll keep it stored for now. As Elsie continues to yell that everything was a complete farce, the man mocks Well, the mighty holy sword hero, for doing something stupid. Well is confused about the man's identity, but Elsie helpfully reminds him that the man was the vice captain of the Royal Knights, and a man who always hated him. Well thinks back on times when the man had ignored, harassed, and insulted him, suddenly remembering who he was. The man suddenly comes closer and gleefully says that he would be announcing his punishment. He sneers at Well. With a sleazy smile, "I'm still trying to be respectful. Although I'm fighting to hold back," the vice captain announces that Well was to be exiled from the kingdom. Well's eyes widened in shock, and even Elsie was in disbelief. Well shouts that his claims were ridiculous and that the king would never allow something like that. Elsie tries to argue as well for proof that Well really was at fault, but the vice captain calls him a dumbass. He pulls out a sheet of paper and tells Well that it was an imperial order from the king himself. This keeps getting more horrible by the minute. Well is struck dumb. Suddenly, the vice captain leans as close to him as possible and gleefully sneering, he starts mocking Well without restraint. He says that the truth finally came out and he knew it all from the very start. He calls him an imposter and a shameless fraud who clung to the hero title for far too long. The vice captain says that in the end he was just a commoner who happened to pull out the holy sword. He even calls him the real beast for daring to lay a hand on Mauricio. I'm just emphasizing everything he says, so if I ever slip up and say some very colorful words, you know the context. There's a pause before Elsie very softly calls the vice captain trash. It's a moment like this that makes it annoying no one else can hear her. Elsie completely loses all composure and yells at how the people were treating the hero who served the kingdom for 19 years. Elsie turns her attention to Well, asking why he wasn't saying anything back when he had so many allies who would support him. But her voice is cut short when Well turns his head to the crowd and they're chanting. Eventually, their words reach Elsie and she's unable to believe what she was hearing. All of the people were chanting for Well to leave the kingdom. The vice captain then excitedly holds out the holy sword to Well, saying with a nasty grin that he knew what was coming next. I am using every word in my vocabulary that can pass off as not too negative. Well frowns, but he stays quiet. He obediently takes the holy sword and stabs it back into its place in the stone it was pulled from. Very softly, as the vice captain and the watched and mocked Well, Elsie apologizes to him for being unable to protect him. I might actually cry. Well reluctantly let go of the sword. As Well is forced to the ground, he thanks Elsie for making him a hero. He says that he should be the one to apologize for being so pathetic. As they bring down the blazing iron and officially brand him a traitor, Well thanks Elsie for everything. Finally, he bids goodbye to the holy sword and Elsie, now back in their place at the pedestal of slumber. A carriage leaves the royal capital. When it travels far enough, the carriage stops and Well is thrown out. Pushed out more like, but same thing. The vice captain throws a sack in the air at him, telling him to go wherever he liked. But with one final sneer, he calls Well a criminal. Well doesn't even bother responding, but in his head, he almost agrees. The sack falls to the ground beside him, a dagger tumbling out from the bindings. As Well watches the carriage leave him behind, it was only then he realized that his role as a hero was officially over. He sits in the snow-covered plains as snowflakes fall over him. He stays there for a while before his thoughts find their way to how Elsie would scold him for catching a cold. He thinks of how she would say something along the lines of, "Who would protect the country if the hero gets sick?" But his thoughts stop. He didn't have the holy sword anymore, and neither was he a hero. His thoughts drift back to the people, screaming for his exile, and his shoulders slump. He wondered what he was going to do from there. There's a sigh. Suddenly, the dagger that tumbled out from the sack says that Well was useless without her. "Well, I'll be damned!" Well exclaims in disbelief to find Elsie, now occupying the blade of the small dagger. Well quickly picks up the dagger carefully in his hands and asks it in a rush what she was doing there and where the holy sword was. Elsie plainly replies that it turns out that she could possess that dagger too. Well smiled, grateful for the company, but Elsie was only getting started. Suddenly, Elsie explodes, going off on a tangent. She couldn't believe that she had been an idiot for staying loyal to such a country, and how they threw Well away after all his dedication. She says that they were worse than the beasts or the ogres. Turning her attention to Well, she goes off on him for completely falling into their trap. Well tries to apologize, but Elsie just goes off on him for the amount of years she spent training him. Finally, Elsie asks why he didn't fight back and escape, saying he had no reason to take it while lying down. Now she didn't even have any words for the brand burned into him, the mark of the criminal. Well reasons that he couldn't move. If he tried to lash out and someone got hurt or he ran off, he would end up tainting the image of the hero he always looked up to. Well is a better person than I'll ever be, I see, would have started throwing hands on sight. Elsie calls him a dummy. Suddenly bursting into tears, Well agrees with her. Elsie is surprised with the sudden crying. Well admits as they walk on into the wilderness that everything just hit him at once, and Elsie calls him an idiot again. Well and Elsie ended up wandering the whole night until morning eventually came. The following day, they found a small village that gave them food and water. The sack the vice captain had given him only had a number of things. I'm honestly surprised he gave you anything, to be quite honest. I'd think he would have let you die on the first night. The sack, a canteen, and a cloak were all property from the knight's order. The dagger was his father's keepsake, and he found a few gold coins hidden in his shoe soles. I appreciate that this implies someone snuck him with some semblance of funding. In his 1 week since being exiled, on the second day, he had to leave the village where he stayed, because they didn't have anything for sale. On the fourth day, he was turned away by a group of soldiers for committing treason. And by the seventh day, he was getting kicked out of whole towns. Well covers his ears as Elsie complains that things were so infuriating, which is useless because can't he hear her in his head? Why cover your ears? Elsie goes off on why Well's wanted poster was spreading so fast, and not only that, his poster said he was guilty of treason. Well comments that thanks to that, he was getting denied entry everywhere. Elsie complains that at the state they were in, Well couldn't even live in any human kingdom. Will tries to argue that eventually they'll find one, but Elsie disagrees. Finally, Elsie suggests that maybe they should head to demon territory. Elsie explains that west of their current kingdom there were no more human nations. Legend says that the west was where demons and non-humans lived. Will is a bit skeptical of the idea since it might seriously be hellish to be in a nation without humans. I mean, you've already seen how a nation with humans treated you, so what's the harm? Will worries about not having the holy sword with him, but Elsie urges that he would be able to do it, even guaranteeing his success. There's a pause as Will thinks it through. Finally deciding on it, he agrees with her belief in him. They begin their journey west. However, a few weeks later, Will lies on the forest floors, completely tattered and dehydrated. He crawls, calling for Elsie in his thoughts, saying that he was seriously dying. Bro, you were fine just a moment ago, OMG? His journey west was filled with hardships. No travelers he came across had heard of the demon's territory. He scaled cliffs, got chased by magic beasts, and finally he ran out of food and water. Elsie tells him that he was going to be fine and that much wouldn't kill him, but her words are cut short because not before long Will's vision goes completely dark. Slowly, his eyes open once more. As the light slowly comes to him, he sees a figure standing over him. The person is saying something, but it remains muffled for him. As he wonders if he had passed out, a stick pokes at him. Once he's completely awake, he realizes he's still lying down on the forest floor. Beside him, a young girl with horns pokes at his head with a small stick. She sings a soft tune and Will stares at her blankly. Will does his best to speak. In a weak voice, he asks the child for water. Noticing that he was awake, the girl's face breaks into a wide grin. In his thoughts, Elsie's voice echoes, thankful that he was awake. She realizes that he couldn't talk at all and offers to talk for him, making Will panic. Blue hair, crimson eyes, and crimson translucent horns. Elsie says that the girl was almost like an angel. She says that, but Will mourns that she was only reading his thoughts out loud to him. Meanwhile, the young girl offers a worm to a Will that is unable to speak. The girl suddenly flops over Will, making him gasp in barely concealed pain. It was no good, he couldn't speak properly and there was no one else who could hear Elsie's voice but him. He reaches out to the girl, asking for help. But the girl smiles at him and says it was okay. That doesn't sound helpful right now, little sis. The trees and bushes rustle. Suddenly another figure pops up from the forest. The woman calls for the young girl, who she calls Delilah. Meanwhile, Delilah turns to the woman with a smile, calling her mommy. Elsie is surprised by her sudden presence. Delilah runs up to her mother and says that Will, who she called Mr., wanted to eat worms, which couldn't be farther from the truth. While Delilah's mother is confused at this new Mr., Will's eyes shine at the appearance of the second angel. The woman, Will's second angel, places his head on her lap as she helps him drink water from a tall bamboo cup. The woman reprimands Delilah for trying to feed Will bugs when he obviously meant water. The little girl giggles in reply. Elsie tells Will that they had gotten lucky. Seeing the woman and the little girl's horns and strange hair and eye colors, Elsie asks for Will's thoughts on how they were most likely demons. However, Will stays quiet as the woman asks him if he could drink more water. Looking up at her kind, smiling face, Will wonders if he had died and gone to heaven. No lie, I would have wondered that too. Elsie yells at him to listen to her and give her an answer. Suddenly realizing what he was doing and finally getting the energy to move, he leaps up from the woman's lap and moves several feet away in a kneeling position. He apologizes once before thanking them over and over again. Elsie angrily tells him to pull himself together, but all Will could think about was how embarrassing he had been. He starts to introduce himself as the hero, but he takes it back and just says his name. As the woman and Delilah listen to him quietly, he explains that he collapsed while looking for the demon's territory. As he's swearing that he's not dangerous, his voice cuts off. In a panic, he thinks about all the people of the kingdom who threw him out, and wonders if the woman would even believe him if his wanted poster had reached that far already. His thoughts are stopped from spiraling out of control when the woman speaks, saying that he was fine. Will is confused, but she smiles at him warmly and her eyes turn to look at something to his side. Will follows her gaze to see that Delilah was already sitting on his lap, happily commenting on his dirty clothes. The woman says that Delilah was shy with strangers, but she had warmed up to him in no time. Will is flustered at how adorable Delilah was, but their peace was rudely interrupted when Will's stomach loudly grumbles. Elsie reprimands him for getting way too comfortable and relaxed. Will blushes, apologizing for his rudeness, although I'm pretty sure you couldn't have stopped that from happening. Delilah runs off towards her mother, laughing at Will. The woman kneels down as she picks up Delilah. She tells Will that their house was nearby, and she offers for him to stay over for the meantime. Will is surprised, but the woman reassures him. The woman, remembering her late introductions, calls themselves Onifolk, which just translates to demonfolk, if anyone is curious. Delilah properly tells Will her name, and the woman introduces herself as Natalia, Delilah's mother. Time passes and the group catch sight of a village. Natalia happily guides them to their people's home, but that's the least of Well's concerns because Natalia had decided to bring him there by carrying him to their destination. Natalia and Delilah just smile as Well panics, flustered at how weird they looked. Natalia reasons with him that he had just collapsed not long ago, but Well continues to be flustered, asking in the first place how she could even lift him. Natalia patiently explains that the Onifolk had a mana technique called Kyoryoku that's passed down through Oni bloodlines. Elsie adds that by focusing mana into specific parts of the body, they could boost physical abilities. Well comments on how amazing the Onifolk were for their abilities. Eventually, they arrive at the village itself. As they walk by, the Onifolk of the village watch them, some commenting on how rare they get visitors. Delilah leads them into a large home, much to Well's surprise. Natalia hands him a change of clothes, and once he's properly clothed, Delilah takes him to talk to the village head. As Well enters the room, a woman with dark hair bows low at him in greeting. She welcomes him to the Onifolk village. She smiles and laughs that it had been years since they had a human visitor. The woman introduces herself as Eliza, the village chief and Natalia's mother-in-law. Well is surprised, thinking she looked rather too young, but when he thought about it more, Well realizes that he hasn't seen anyone old around the village. As Natalia serves them tea, Eliza asks about why Well collapsed in the forest. Well begins to tell his story, but he's cut off with a deafening roar that makes everyone flinch. Well is nervous, but Elsie just confirms his thoughts. Suddenly, a group of Onifolk burst into the room calling for Eliza. A magic beast had just shown up. The other Onifolk men were holding a large wolf-like monster back for the meantime using their Kyoryoku, but it was bigger than they thought, so they didn't know how long they would last. The man reporting to Eliza breaks into tears as he delivers his father's words. The man says that they would try to hold the monster off, but that monster might require Oni Dash to drive away. The man might not be able to get rid of it, so if that happens, he leaves the aftermath to Eliza. Eliza squeezes her eyes shut in pain. When she opens them, she immediately barks orders. She tells Natalia to take Delilah and Well to the back and for everyone else in the room to reinforce the barrier. Natalia and Delilah head to a back door and Natalia screams for Well to come with them. However, Well urges her to wait. In a rush, he asks her if the Onifolk had a way to kill a magic beast and what exactly they meant by an Oni Dash. Natalia pauses. Hesitantly, she tells him that even among demons, no one has ever truly slain a magic beast, but the Onifolk have one secret move that can be used only once in a lifetime. It was a hidden technique only passed down to the Oni men called Oni Dash. The person would break his horn with Kyoryoku, pour all his mana into the shattered horn, forge a crimson blade sharp enough to wound a magic beast, but the user's life force would burn out in an instant. It was a heroic act passed from father to son, generation to generation. Knowing what he was thinking, Elsie asks Well if he was sure, knowing that it was basically a suicide mission. "Oh Well, the man that you are truly," Natalia suddenly exclaims. Well makes a run for it to the village entrance, saying that he wasn't going to let things turn out like that. Natalia tries to run after him in worry, but as she reaches for his retreating back, she suddenly stops short. Another man appears in her vision, telling her that he would be returning. Natalia falls to her knees at the memory of her loved one. "Good job, Well, you met this woman in less than a day and unlocked her trauma." Well continues to run through the village. Elsie tries to talk him out of it, reminding him that he no longer had the holy sword Elsring. Well replies that of course he knew. He also knew he needed a weapon forged with magic ore, which meant that without the sword there was no possibility of slaying a magic beast. Sacred weapons changed shape with mana thanks to the magic ore in the blade, but no one still knew how they were made. Well grit his teeth. He knew that without a sacred weapon he was just a powerless old man. He knew that. But the image of Natalia and Delilah come to mind, smiling at him happily as they welcome him to their house. He clenches his father's dagger tightly in his hands. Finally, he reaches an Oni man about to be attacked. Just as the wolf pounces at the man, Well slides in between them, shielding himself and the man using the blade of the dagger. Well is focused, determined that he still has something left to do. A large crash rings through the forest as the wolf collides with Well. Well orders the Onifolk to get back. They argue that he was only a human, but Well tells them that he would deal with it. The Onifolk flee as Well starts to strategize with Elsie. He asks if the neck was still the weak spot, to which Elsie confirms. She asks him how he was going to take it down, seeing how the thing was fully grown. With a serious expression, Well tells her that he was going to stab it again and again until it stopped moving. Meanwhile, Natalia finally catches up to Well and the wolf. She stands behind a group of Onifolk soldiers staying back from the fight. Internally, she reprimands Well for not being able to understand things. She watches as Well lunges for the wolf and she screams for him to stop. But in that moment, it's not Well she sees. She sees another man lunge for the wolf's claws stabbing through the man's stomach cleanly. The man's eyes meet with Natalia's as she reaches out for him, but when Natalia blinks, it's Well in front of her. The wolf slashes at him, but Well dodges in time. The wolf moves fast and goes to bite Well's hand. Well grits his teeth and positioning his dagger, he stabs the wolf's neck. The wolf doesn't let go of his arm, but Well continues to stab at its neck again and again. Well, you truly are built different, OMG. Suddenly, a light seems to shine, and with one last stab to its neck, the wolf goes down. It finally releases Well from its grasps as its mouth goes slack. When Well opens his eyes, he's looking up at the sky. He was lying down once more, his left arm completely bloodied, but very much alive. He's surprised at the fact. Completely coming to his senses, he raises the dagger to his eyes. It was ruined, but that wasn't what Well was thinking. He thought magic beasts couldn't even be scratched without a sacred weapon. Elsie, still inside the dagger, reminds him that she's told him the same thing 1,000 times, asking him how many years it took for her to train him. Calming down, she finally says that Well's mana was insane. She explains that although the blade wasn't even made of magic ore and it only lasted for a second, Well had flooded the tiny dagger with so much mana before compressing the mana into a blade. It was only for a moment, but it turned the dagger into a pseudo-sacred weapon. So in short, Elsie concludes that Well was more than strong enough, being able to kill a magic beast with his own strength. I want to see the vice captain's face so bad when he killed that wolf. As he struggles to stand up, the Unifolk runs up to him and surrounds him with thankful smiles. Well apologizes to them for all the damages, but he turns when he hears Natalia calling out to him as she runs to their group. As she nears, Elsie panics and tells Well to grit his teeth, but Well reacts too slowly. The moment she was close enough, Natalia delivered a harsh slap to his face, catching him by surprise. Damn, that's the look of a woman who didn't plan on holding back at all. The Unifolk watch as Natalia screams at Well, now back down on the ground. She goes off on him about fighting a magic beast alone with a dagger so tiny. Well tries to tell her that he was a hero, but he stops short when she asks him what he thought his life was worth. Suddenly, she orders him to show her his wound, and Well nervously tries to tell her that it was just a scratch. Natalia doesn't listen to him and plainly states that she would heal it. Well continues to try and brush off her offer, saying that it won't take long for him to heal since his wounds healed super fast, but before he knew it, Natalia was already kneeling beside him. She holds a hand to his bitten arm and it starts to glow. When she finally lets go, the bite mark is completely gone. Even Elsie is completely surprised that it was healed in an instant. Well adding that it was even faster than Mariciel's healing magic, who boasted a 15-minute healing time for sprains as the kingdom's #1 healer. As Well looks up to Natalia, about to ask if her abilities were another technique by the Unifolk, his voice dies off. Before him, Natalia cries, telling Well that she was also glad that he was alive. Well watches as she breaks down into full sobbing. He's unsure what to do, but just as he thinks of trying to comfort her, a finger is harshly pressed to his cheek. The very same one Natalia slapped, might I add. It was Delilah, angry at him for making her mother cry. She goes to hug Natalia and angrily tells Well to hug both her and Natalia for comfort. This kid is so cute. I love her. Well stops short, not sure if he heard right, but Delilah just screams for him to hug them again. Well's thoughts start to spiral as he's unsure what to do. He starts to think how he apparently still had the power of a hero still lingering in his hands. They only met that day, and he was pretty sure Natalia had a husband, but for some reason Delilah was asking for a dirty old man to hug them. Well's thoughts continue to rush as he desperately asks for Elsie's help. Elsie just sighs heavily and tells him that he was hopeless. Unable to hold it in for any longer, Natalia lets out a small laugh. She musters up a smile as she thanks her daughter for worrying about her. She turns her attention to a panicked Well and apologizes for offending him, sis. You slapped him so hard he fell back to the ground. I'd say that's less offending him and more causing actual offense. Well nervously reassures her that it was nothing and tries to apologize for making her worry, but Natalia takes his hand. Still crying, Natalia truly thanks him for saving Delilah and Eliza. Well is reminded of his first day of being exiled, sitting alone in the snow and realizing how his role as a hero was over. Natalia and Delilah thank him for protecting the Unifolk. Placing his hand over Natalia's shaking ones, he softly tells her that he was really glad to have been able to protect her. As Delilah takes him into a hug, the village of Unifolk celebrates around them with their victory. Back in the village chief's house, and after Well took down the magic beast that attacked the village, he explained everything to Eliza and the others. He told them about how he used to be a hero who hunted magic beasts, that he was framed for attacking the princess, that he was exiled for treason, rejected by every nation, and was finally branded for life. You've gone through a lot in like 2 weeks? Well, at the end of his long story, Eliza reassures him that in the village they didn't judge people by those brands the humans made. She tells him that more importantly he should stand tall because to the Unifolk, he was a hero who saved them from a magic beast. The knowledge gladly surprises Well. And so, with no place left in human lands, Well started living at the chief's home with Natalia and Delilah. He also took up work hunting magic beasts around the village. In front of him, Wells served a full meal of fish, rice, and soup. He sits with the rest of Eliza's family as they dine. Well takes a bite out of the food and immediately exclaims at how delicious it was, Elsie readily agreeing with him. Natalia is ecstatic that he loved it. Natalia, I'm pretty sure you can do no wrong with him. Delilah and Natalia bid Well goodbye for the day as he goes to do his task. With a group of other Unifolk warriors, Well takes down magic beast after magic beast, bringing back the bodies of some of them for their meals. Later on in the day, as they continue to hunt in the forest, another Oni man comes up behind them. The man calls Well over. Well happily greets Grain, the Unifolk blacksmith, as he nears him. Grain tells him that he finally managed to forge him something decent. In his hands was a sword wrapped in cloth. Presenting it to Well and Elsie, they freeze at the sight of the holy sword Elsring. But Grain clarifies that it was only a replica. That's a damn fine replica too. Whoa! Holding up the sword, Elsie is amazed that she could even possess it. Well is happy, exclaiming that it would make hunting so much more easier. Grain explains that when Well had told him about the legendary weapons from the human world the other day, he couldn't resist forging one to see what they would look like. He honestly found it pretty fun. Well thanks him and tries to pay for the weapon, however Grain brushes his concerns away. As he bids him goodbye, Grain says that if Well hadn't shown up when he did, he would have used Oni Dash. Elsie and Well stare at his retreating back, feeling touched. Since then, Well uses the replica for hunting the magic beasts. But after enough uses, the sword starts to break, much to Well's horror. At just the right moment, Grain comes in prepared, looking proud as he holds on to multiple replicas of the holy sword Lamau. We love the commitment. As night sets in, loud chatter comes from a single hut in the village. Hands gather in a toast, cheering for Well as he sits in the middle of a rowdy party of Unifolk digging into their meals. Strapped to his hip, Elsie is happy for Well as he's being treated like family. Well wonders if it was really alright for him to be praised so much since they had already been so kind to him and all he's done is what he's always done, which was hunt magic beasts. Elsie is about to reassure him when another Oni man comes up behind Well with a pat on his shoulder, calling him a hero. The man was Darukin, the Unifolk butcher, and he urges Well to eat their finest meats. Well awkwardly admits that he would feel bad. Darukin is surprised by his words. He grips onto Well's shoulders as the hero starts to sweat nervously. Very seriously, Darukin says that Well takes down magic beasts and he never even bothers claiming the magic stones for himself. Thanks to Well, the village was thriving. Well is surprised at his words. However, he suddenly asks about the magic stones, making sure that they were the ones that one would usually get from big beasts. They were always found near the heart and something one couldn't harvest from more immature beasts. Darukin explains that they were incredibly rare, but Well just plainly asks what they were used for. Darukin is horrified that he didn't know. Well explains that he only ever saw the stones used for things like the Holy Sword and the Holy Lance, and no one in the kingdom could even work with them. In a panic, Darukin tells Well that they were worth as much if not more than gold coins. So I guess it was just used as currency? I'm still rather confused. Well blanks at the information that not even Elsie knew about. They both wonder, rather horrified, if the information was hidden from them on purpose and if heroes were making the country rich without them even knowing it. Before Well could continue thinking about it, Darukin offers him another drink as he sits beside him. The other Unifolk around them start mumbling about Darukin's silver tongue speech and how Well keeps on buying them, but the two don't seem to hear them. As Darukin serves Well his drink, he says that the way he saw it, Well deserved more than what he was given. Well tries to disagree, but Darukin continues that everyone in the village appreciated him. He adds that since Well used to be a hero, if that was how the human world treated him, then maybe it was the human world that was wrong. Elsie immediately bursts into agreement, saying that Darukin completely understood. Breaking the tense atmosphere, Darukin urges Well to eat and drink more, giving him more of their best meat. As Well thankfully accepts it, Elsie comments how she misses having a real body during celebrations. A few days later at the village chief's home, Natalia and Delilah enter Well's room with tea. Well thanks Delilah for delivering the tea, which makes the girl laugh and run around the room. Natalia urges Delilah for them to leave Well alone so they could go to bed too, but Delilah climbs up Well's back. She giggles that she wasn't sleepy yet, and she and Well both laugh happily. Elsie finds the whole scene cute. Natalia observes that Delilah had gotten so attached to Well. As they continue to talk, Natalia suddenly notices the piles of notes all over Well's room. She asks him what he was researching for him to stay up so late. Well softly says that everyone in the village had been so good to him. He just wanted to return the favor. Natalia hears his words and lightly panics, thinking that he's already done enough for them. Well argues that it wasn't even close, but he has also realized something. After seeing everything they could do, he was sure that Unifolk could control mana much better than humans. If they could harness their abilities properly, Well thought that maybe they could stop people from dying after using Oni Dash. Natalia is startled by his words. She asks him if he would really go that far for them, but Well just counters that the Onifolk were the first ones to help him. Natalia is obviously touched at the thought. Almost immediately she tells them that she was making a late-night snack. Elsie teases Well, saying that he wasn't that bad, but Well is just confused. As the days go by, Well spends more time with Natalia and Delilah. The two girls present him with trays of food, help him relax, and join him for walks. One day, Elsie opens up a conversation with Well, suggesting that he marry Natalia. That's definitely one way to start a talk, Elsie. Well is completely dumbstruck at the idea. He crawls closer to Elsie's sword stand, voice nervous and confused, but Elsie keeps going, reminding him that she could hear his thoughts loud and clear. Elsie adds that it also didn't seem like Natalia disliked the idea either, which seems to surprise Well. Elsie continues to reason that Natalia was a wonderful woman, wonderful enough to make those royal princesses from their old kingdom look like amateurs. Well thinks about it for a second before sighing heavily, unsure. He explains that he managed as a hero, but when it came to things like what Elsie was saying, it was the reason he got betrayed. Will buries his face in his hand, saying that at the end of the day he was just some guy with a sword. Elsie immediately gets angry, reminding him that he was fighting fine without the holy sword, and also reminding him that she was there because he was himself, not because he was the hero. Well thanks her, but he admits that he still wasn't over his exile. Thinking back to the imperial order, he still couldn't believe that the king gave it, especially when he told Well that they were family and that he could trust them. As Well moped on the floor, Elsie hesitantly speaks up and says that there was something she had been keeping from him. OMG, Elsie, how could you? Elsie slowly breaks it to him that he got completely set up by the two princesses. I mean, I feel like we as a collective all knew they weren't trustworthy from their reactions. Elsie reminds him about the New Year's banquet. Back then, Mariciel had poured him a drink that was laced with sleeping drugs. Later in the night, while Well was out cold, the princesses snuck into his room and staged an assault. Elsie recalls the day before Well's exile. She had floated about the castle as an unseen spirit and entered the first princess's bedroom. Elsie watched as Elisiel happily entered the bedroom, saying that their plan had been a success. Their uncle Well was a criminal who disrespected the first princess. Elisiel dances around the room singing that there was no proof, no witnesses, so there was no one to expose the truth. She adds that Well even thinks he blacked out from drinking, so he wouldn't even defend himself. Mariciel is quiet for a second before nervously wondering if they had gone a little bit overboard, especially since Well was so sweet too. But Elisiel just scoffs at her words. She flops down on her sister's bed before very harshly saying that there was no way she was marrying a plain old guy. The princesses remember their first time meeting Well. The king had urged them to say hello properly to Well. Back when Mariciel was 10 and Elisiel was 8, the king allowed them to meet for the first time after Well had just hunted another magic beast for them. Well, who was at the time 24 years old, smiles at them warmly, simply talking about his previous battle. Okay, I don't condone what the princesses did, but I understand it would have been traumatizing to expect a marriage candidate at 10 or 8 years old to be a full-grown man. Both princesses at the time thought he was nice enough, but they thought heroes were supposed to be sparkling, not to mention that Well was a lot older than them. One day the king tells the sisters that he would be pleased if one of them married Well. The queen backs up her husband, saying that to keep peace in the kingdom, they needed to tie the hero down. The sisters begin to fight over who would have to marry Well. Okay, so the whole family is cursed. Well dodged a missile from the looks of it. And finally, on the day of the New Year ceremony of the hero selection, their so-called real prince appeared in the form of the new Holy Lance hero. His name was Belmoret, and he was 15 years old. The sisters' hearts immediately skipped a beat at the boy's cute features. But now, since Well the princess's obstacle was gone, the sisters officially declare that it was a competition of who gets to marry Belmoret. As the two girls start to bicker, Elsie, who watched on as a spirit, gets pissed at their antics and leaves. She floats down the castle hallways, convinced that she was done with everyone. She announces, to no one but herself of course, that she was going where Well was going. In the present day, Elsie finishes retelling her memories. Well looked absolutely horrified as he listened to the whole story. In the end, Elsie left the holy sword and possessed Well's father's keepsake dagger. Suddenly, Well bends backwards at the realization that he was the victim of a royal scandal. He honestly didn't think that the two princesses hated him that much. He even spoiled them. He also reasoned that there were younger, more talented men than him. So he refused the marriage proposal. I think the princesses would agree, seeing how much they wanted Belmoret. Poor kid's gonna have a tough time too. Well mourns that he really was pathetic, but Elsie snaps him out of his thoughts. She tells him to stop moping and to stop blaming himself. The scheming princesses, the snakes, her words not mine, who used the scandal to bring Well down, the useless king and queen who couldn't stop it, and all the citizens who turned on him without a second thought. Elsie yells at him that they were the problem and that he was the one who got betrayed. Well asks if it really was okay for him to think like that. Elsie goes quiet for a moment before she tells him not to protect the wrong people. The Anafolk welcomed him and they needed him. Well stays quiet, but he smiles at the idea. Elsie pauses for a minute. But not long, she explodes into another bout of anger. She says that it was the exact reason she stayed quiet because she found it all too stupid. She says that Well would just stress about it, which he did, and that she hated seeing him like that. Well cowers away from her, apologizing and saying that he really was pathetic. They both pause, and a silence fills the room as Elsie calms down. Changing subjects, Elsie starts to praise him. That was quite the tone shift. She tells Well that he had the heart of a true hero and that overly kind nature of his. Not to mention, he also had Elsie. Although slightly confused, Well was sure she was trying to cheer him up. Time passes, and Well practices sword moves outside the village chief's home. In his head, he was thinking about how he couldn't freeload forever. Is it freeloading when you're their local beast hunter, though? Just then, footsteps come closer to him. Well stops swinging his sword around to greet Eliza a good morning. As soon as she was close enough, Eliza bows low and thanks him, making Well confused. Eliza explains that Natalia had told her that he was thinking of ways to help the Anafolk. Well gets flustered, explaining that he just had an idea. Eliza offers that if there was anything she could do, he just had to say the word. Before he could say anything else, however, Eliza changes topics. She point-blank asks him what he thought of Natalia. The women in this story have such a way with words. You gotta love them. Well does a spit take at her words. He stumbles over what to say, trying to come up with a proper response, but Eliza continues. She tells him that Natalia actually lost her parents to a magic beast and her husband, Eliza's son, was killed 5 years back. But Natalia had never stopped smiling or supporting Eliza. However, things had changed since Well arrived. Both Natalia and Delilah smiled the same way they used to. Well stayed quietly surprised. Eliza thought that Natalia and Delilah truly cared for him, but she knew Well's feelings weren't settled yet. Well awkwardly thinks how Eliza had seen right through him and his concerns. He had endless worries between their different races and difference in status. Well clenches his fist and apologizes, but Eliza just laughs and tells him not to overthink it. She tells him that she wasn't asking him to shoulder everything, but she wanted him to promise her one thing. Looking back at him with a smile, she asks him not to die. Damn, that's quite heavy a promise. As Eliza walks away from him, she plainly says that she just didn't want to see those girls cry again. Well already failed that mission for making Natalia cry on their first day. Left alone, Well has a hardened but determined look to his eyes. Later on, Well walks down the village with a rather large sack in hand. The doors to Grain's workshop open and he heartily greets Well as he enters. Grain asks if he was there for his usual sword sharpening, to which Well confirms, but he was also there for something else. He lowers down the sack on a table and Grain is shocked at what he sees. The sack was completely full of magic stones. Well plainly explains that using Elsie's detection support, I didn't even know she had that. Well had hunted every beast around the village and harvested them. Grain is almost unable to believe that a human alone was able to do it. He nervously asks what Well was planning. Well recalls that magic stones were supposed to be worth more than gold. He tells Grain that if the stones weren't enough, then he would keep hunting and harvesting. Well pleads with Grain to forge him a stronger sword, one that was harder, tougher, and sharper. With an almost resigned sigh, Grain comments that Well was out risking his life again. Well replies with a small smile. Grain then tells him that there was something he wanted to ask of Well, too. He explains that he wanted to forge a legendary weapon, but there was one sword he was never able to make for 2 reasons. One was the materials, the second was the wielder. The sword required an absurd amount of magic stones and someone with the skill to wield it. Grain declares that he was going to forge the ultimate sword. With a grin, he asks Well if he could help him make his dream come true. Well readily agrees. The powerful sword Grain proposed was a blade forged entirely from magic stones. To protect Natalia and the others, a new holy sword for Well was going to be born. Back in the Kingdom of Klenrad, Belmoret takes a short break as the rest of the soldiers take care of the magical beast he just defeated. The army soon returns to the castle with their hunt. When they arrive in the throne room, a man grandly throws his arms in the air as he presents the king with the first hunting result from the lance hero Belmoret, which was a massive magic beast. The king is rather flustered, having not seen a magic beast that size in decades. He holds up a rather large magic stone in hand, amazed at its size. The man in front of the king proudly boasts their accomplishment. He calls Well a criminal before correcting himself and calling him the former sword hero, telling the king that he used to only hunt weaker beasts that were barely turning into monsters. The man smugly says that their current hero was incredibly brave. King Lordvat sighs, saying that if what the man was saying was true, then it was a relief. He then asks where Belloret was, and the man says that the princesses were tending to him at that moment. The king is confused until the man explains that he must have been tense from his battle because the moment he arrived at the castle, Belmoret collapsed into sleep. My guy looks like he's been through a lot. And that was just his first hunt. He's gonna die soon if no one helps. The king freezes at the news. From what he remembered, that never happened with Well, because Well was built different. King Lordvad is knocked out of his thoughts when the man suddenly comes forward and says that with great humility, Knight Commander Grandel Murat came to report in Belmoret's place. From what I'm getting, the whole kingdom's army is useless except for the holy weapon users. The king awkwardly says that the Grandel had done well. He changes subjects and says that even if Belmoret could wield the holy lance, he still lacked experience, and so the king was counting on Grandel to support him. The king's main fault is he doesn't know anything besides what people tell him, I see. Grandel agrees with the king's decision, barely hiding a dark smirk. From atop the throne room, a man listens in on the conversation, understanding the situation. The knight commander and those with him had delayed the hunts, letting monsters grow stronger just so the rookie hero could slay them and look impressive. Looking over the expanse of land from outside the balcony, the man thinks they were utter fools. Meanwhile, in the unwavering village, Natalia and Delilah stare in awe as they walk by a street full of vendors. A trade caravan had arrived for the first time in years. Commented that it felt like a festival since everyone was so happy. Natalia explains that the land gets a lot of monster sightings, so visitors from outside the village were a rare treat. Stays quiet at her words. Be proud, bro, you cleansed the village of most of the monsters. Natalia turns to with bright eyes and says that for that day it was a rare chance for them to see foreign goods and people, so should enjoy himself too. Delilah throws a fist into the air, agreeing with her mother. Both Natalia and Delilah were totally fired up. With a blush on his cheeks, he thinks of how the two of them were both adorable. Elsie teases by repeating his thoughts back to him, making him even more flustered. They end up spending the day checking the stalls. Delilah marvels at potion bottles, and Natalia browses the stores selling cloth. Haggles with salesmen, ending up paying for all sorts of items. Bro is officially the man of the house El. Suddenly, as the three of them continue their day, a man calls out to calling him the hero. Oh, so this is what it means for the past to come back and haunt you. The man, who seems to be a merchant, asks if truly was the sword hero from the Kingdom of Klenrad. He asks what was doing there in the unwavering village. Blinks, not sure who the man was. Understanding the situation, Natalia and Delilah tell that they were going on ahead. Time passes and the man holds his head up with his crossed hands, a complicated look on his face. Across from him, sits awkwardly, waiting for him to say something. Elsie asks if the man was okay, considering he's had that look ever since had explained everything. Finally having enough, raises his hand and calls out to the man. The man snaps into attention, apologizing for his rudeness. The story had been too much for him that he fainted. He fainted right then and there? The man clears his throat and informs that for the price of casting him out, the kingdom was now in serious trouble. Serves them right in my opinion, but I'm not built like exclaimed to hear that magic beasts had been swarming the areas around the kingdom. The man confirms that his information was true, and trade routes were becoming unstable, adding that even approaching them was dangerous. The man's name was Baralek, and he was the captain of the trade caravan. He traveled between human and demon nations centered around the kingdom. Trust and intel were everything in their line of work. Is confused, tilting his head as he remembers that the kingdom had a new hero. Baralek nervously laughs, saying that things weren't looking too good. Apparently, after each hunt, Belmoret would collapse and sleep for several days. Is horrified at the news, asking in a frenzy how often Belmoret went out hunting. According to someone new in the capital, Belmoret was lucky to go hunting once every 7 days. Oh Jiminy, they're going to kill that child. Baralek makes a comment that he can't do business if he couldn't get into the kingdom, but that was the least of and Elsie's concerns. The more a beast grows, the harder it is to kill. Before a beast fully transforms, they can still be taken down with regular weapons, but they're still more aggressive than normal animals. However, for full monster transformations, their rage is increased, they mutate into giants, their intelligence increases, and their hide and horns harden. It was why always sought out beasts on the verge of transforming. Yeah, I figured there was a reason he only went for the smaller monsters. Had spent 10 years preemptively slaying them to keep things under control. Damn, they deconstructed all his hard work in a matter of what? Weeks? A month or so at most? Elsie compliments him by saying that was such a diligent man, but thoughts continue to spiral. The monsters around the kingdom were out of control, the new hero was overwhelmed, and the people living there were most likely in danger. Elsie comments that the Holy Lance might end up being too much for Belmoret. I think it's more so that the whole kingdom is too much for that kid. With a dark look on his face, wonders if the kingdom was doomed. Seeing his expression steadily getting worse, Baralek tells that he didn't have to worry about them since it was the path the kingdom had chosen, which is a very good point. Despite how he's really feeling, hesitantly agrees. Elsie cuts in, full-heartedly agreeing with Baralek and reminding that they branded him a criminal and cast him out. Again, Well agrees with her words, but he admits that he can't help but worry a little. "You're too nice for your own good, bro." Baralek hesitantly asks Well if he resented the kingdom for how they treated him, but Well answers that he didn't. He tells Baralek that of course he was shocked, but he most likely had some fault in it too, brother. Deadass, your only fault was trusting them too easily. Well says that he was just a plain, unimpressive guy from a humble background, so he understood why the princesses and some of the nobles hated him. But thanks to all that, he met people who truly accepted him. In a way, he was grateful for what he had now. Baralek stares in quiet awe at Well. Scratching the back of his neck, he then says that he supposed that he should be grateful too. Well is confused, but Baralek explains that if someone could slay monsters near demon lands, it would be so much easier to work with demonfolk. Baralek suddenly grips Well's shoulders. He points out that very few humans traded with demons, so he begs Well to continue supporting him. Elsie comments that it seemed like Well had sparked Baralek's merchant fire. The next day, Baralek had given Well a request. It was to escort the caravan to the border. As Well slays another beast, Baralek comes up to him thanking him profusely. They had safely made it to the border. Well returns his sword back into its sheath. Watching Baralek and the merchants talk amongst themselves, Well is glad to know they'll be able to get back to the village before sunset. Elsie tells him that there was no need to rush so much. She adds that Grain and the others were watching the village anyway. In a worst-case scenario and something happens, Well could rush back in half a day. Baralek bows his head to Well, thanking him again for the fastest journey they've had. As they rest on the steps of one of the wagons, Elsie suddenly asks whether he was planning on buying something for Natalie and Delilah. She cheekily asks if he was planning on using his reward to bring them souvenirs. Flustered, Well tells her not to read his thoughts again, adding that he already spent everything ordering his new sword. But the job wasn't just about the reward. He also wanted to check for any wild monsters drifting in from the kingdom. So far, there was nothing serious. As he's thinking that maybe he was being overly cautious, he looks up at the sound of growling. He stands up immediately as the monster lunges, alerting the rest of the caravan merchants. Well leaps away in time as the monster lands on solid ground. Well twists into the air, taking out his sword and slashing down. He's able to graze the monster, but it immediately makes its escape. Baralek and the rest of the caravan celebrate his victory, saying that the monster fled with one strike. They call him a man truly worthy of the hero title, but Well stares at the direction the monster left through. He's silent for a moment before he whips around to face Baralek. In a frenzy, he bows low and apologizes to him, saying that he would like to cut the escort job short and decline the reward. Baralek is flustered and confused with Well's words, since the request was already fulfilled and he was just about to pay him. He tells him to wait, but Well was already running back into the forest. Another merchant who was watching asked where he was going. With a dark look on his face, Baralek answers that Well was chasing after the monster. The other merchant is confused since the monster already ran off, so there was no need to pursue it. Baralek says that Well mentioned that it might be headed towards the unwavering village. Baralek notes that Well's face was so serious he hoped that it was nothing serious. Back in the unwavering village. A few hours earlier, Delilah is slumped on her back at a corner of the house, her cheeks angrily puffed out. Eliza enters the room, calling out to Natalia and asking what was wrong with Delilah. Embarrassed, Natalia explains that when Well had left to go escort the caravan, Delilah had gotten a little sulky. As Eliza pats Delilah's head in comfort, the little girl says that she wanted to play with Well immediately. Natalia comments happily that Delilah had become too attached to him. Suddenly, an idea strikes Eliza. Uh-oh, this can't be good. Later on, Delilah calls out to Natalia to hurry up, rushing her mother to follow along. They walk along the path in the forest outside of the village. Natalia sighs in exasperation at the memory of Eliza, cheekily suggesting that they go and greet Well on his return. Delilah holds on to her mother's hand, puffing out her cheeks again as she says that she wanted to be the first to say welcome back to Well. Natalia goes quiet, thinking about Delilah's words. She imagines Well arriving, holding up Delilah in his arms and greeting her that he was back and she would welcome him home. The image makes her smile. "Oh girl, you're down bad." Natalia kneels down to face Delilah and tells her that she wants to welcome back Well when he returns too. She suddenly freezes as the bushes rustle and a monster comes out. Wounded in one eye, it was the monster that Well had attacked. Natalia screams as she holds on to Delilah. A large boom echoes in the forest, the sound echoing all the way to the unwavering village. The villagers are all alarmed, including Eliza. Another villager comes in, alerting everyone that a monster was attacking the village. Eliza immediately thinks about Natalia and Delilah, who were still in the forest. Meanwhile, Natalia breathes heavily as she rushes through the forest. She couldn't understand what a huge monster was doing near the village. She looks back at the monster chasing them down, making sure that it was still a distance away. Natalia remembers that Well had mentioned monsters from the capital. Lost in her thoughts, her foot catches on a tree root and she goes down. Realizing her mistake, Natalia's thoughts start to spiral as she prays that at least Delilah should be able to escape. But suddenly Delilah calls out to her. Delilah wraps her arms around Natalia, telling her it was going to be okay. "Don't make me cry like this, kid. I'm not ready for it." Natalia's eyes seem to focus, her thoughts clearing. Delilah reminds her that Well was coming. Natalia hugs Delilah close, agreeing with her. As the monster's claws close in on them, she squeezes her eyes shut, praying for Well to come and save them. A boom crashes to the ground. Natalia stares in shock as she and Delilah are in Well's arms in the next second, making their escape as the monster's claws miss them. Prayers really do work, huh? Dripping with sweat, Well smiles down at them. He apologizes for being a little late, grateful that he made it just in time. Delilah grins, happily welcoming him back. Natalia gapes at him, almost in disbelief that he was there. Well lowers them a safe distance away, telling them to stay back. Natalia holds Delilah close to her chest, thankful that Well really did arrive in time. She's amazed by him until something catches her eye and she freezes. Something red steadily drips to the ground. As Well raises his sword, Natalia stares at his back, wounds slashed open by the monster and covered in blood. He had gotten injured while protecting the two of them. Natalia reaches out to him in a panic, telling him to wait. But Well rushes into the battle despite the wound. Well faces down the magic beast as it leaps into the air. As the monster tries to strike him again with its claws, Well is pushed back using his sword as a shield. He winces in pain as he feels the sting of the wounds on his back. Elsie tells him to calm down since he was starting to panic. Well knows, but he was too worried about Natalia and Delilah. The monster's paw reaches him and he's thrown to the side. Natalia covers her mouth as she stifles down a scream. Well loses his grip on the sword holding Elsie, the blade clanging on the ground. Natalia and Delilah call out to Well, telling him to run as he crashes into the rocks. The monster slowly corners him. His thoughts are muddled as he curses at himself. The worst-case scenario just happened. He had dropped his weapon in the middle of the battle. The monster hits him with a series of attacks, unable to stop it. He didn't want Natalia and Delilah to see him like that. As the monster brings its claws down on him once more, Well clenches his teeth. He reminds himself that he was supposed to be a hero. When Well opens his eyes, he sees the sky past the trees. He breathed heavily, confused at what was happening. When he looks up, he finds the monster trying to dig its fangs into his body. He freezes, surprised that he was still alive. The monster rolls him over, trying to look for a proper place to bite him. But the monster is as confused as Well was. Well couldn't believe it. He wasn't even feeling the bite. Elsie's voice comes to mind, telling him not to lose focus or he was going to feel it. In a panic, Well escapes the monster's grasp and runs for the sword holding Elsie. He holds it up, frantically asking her what was happening to him. The monster follows after him, now trying to bite at his head, but to no avail. Elsie explains that it looked like when Well pushes himself and focuses, he can compress mana and harden his body. That is both cool and so stupid that only he could pull it off. Well is in disbelief that a human could do mana hardening, much less him. Elsie sniffles, proud that Well truly was getting stronger. She laughs, saying that she knew that something like that wouldn't kill him. Well is even more confused than before because of his words. Meanwhile, Natalia and Delilah watch from a distance, amazed at the scene in front of them. Well was still being bit by the monster. Delilah points it out, and Natalia is amazed at the power of the hero of mankind. Having had enough, Well takes his sword in hand and slashes it at the monster. Its body falls limply on the floor, however, as Well lowers his sword as well. The blade starts to chip all over. Well hesitantly holds the blade up to his face. His face is horrified at the state of his sword, but Elsie is more annoyed than anything. She starts complaining, saying that Monster Hide was always so damn tough that her body was falling apart again. But she says that it was only because the stranger Well's feelings were. The more pressure it puts on her as a blade. She grumbles, saying that if she only had a body that could handle Well's mana properly. Well, more than exhausted, stabs the sword into the ground to keep it standing. He begs Elsie to let him rest since he was falling apart too. Elsie huffs out, saying that he was speaking nonsense because he was still a man. Well asks if he wasn't even being treated as human anymore. Elsie reminds him that she's told him before, with his mana and physical ability, he was already in the same league as monsters. Rubbing the blood from the corner of his mouth, Well asks her what she meant. Elsie says that his abnormal strength was her fault. Well freezes. Elsie reminds him that she swore she would never ever let him die. Nobody could see her, just a spirit sealed in a weapon, alone for ages. But he was the only one who found her. So she promised herself that she would never let Well feel that same loneliness. Kinda failed at that part when he got kicked out of the human kingdom. Not gonna lie, but I digress. Whatever it took, she would make him stronger than any beast. While Elsie was experimenting, she realized she could tweak his body from the inside. Definitely not weird, of course not. Well is alarmed. Quickly defending herself, Elsie says that she only meant to give him a little boost, sis. He survived getting mauled alive because they couldn't bite through him. That is not a little boost. Elsie says that it was just a small dose of mana from the past heroes stored in the holy weapon, but one day she noticed that he'd already gone beyond human limits. Well lists all the things that aided him as a hero, being able to kill a magic beast without the holy sword, unconsciously reinforcing his body with mana, and still not tiring in his 30s. Elsie says that it was all thanks to her tinkering. Cool, still weird though. Nervously, Elsie says that she sort of mentioned it to him before, but Well asks how in the world was he supposed to figure that out. Fair question. After a pause, Elsie says that she could listen to Well complain as much as he wanted. She would listen all day if she had to, but Well cuts in, saying he wasn't going to. He tells her that he wasn't mad, and with a soft smile he says that Elsie already knew what he was thinking. Elsie is rendered silent. Suddenly someone calls out to him. He looks up to see Natalia. He was glad she and Delilah were safe, but he cut himself off. He sees the dark look in her eyes as she steadily walks over to him. As she neared, he started to panic, feeling like it was deja vu. He threw his hands in the air frantically, trying to say that he wasn't planning on doing anything reckless. Natalia raises her hand and Well flinches. He clenches his teeth instinctively, waiting for the slap, but when he feels nothing, he opens his eyes slowly. He completely freezes to find Natalia hugging him close. "Congrats, bro! You're now in hugging status." With a happy smile on her face, Natalia welcomes him back. Slowly, Well returns her embrace, saying that he was home. He's grateful that he was able to protect them. As he sits on the forest ground to accept Delilah's hug, he thanks Elsie because of all she's done for him. Elsie calls him an idiot, adding that compliments wouldn't get him anywhere. She says that it was his strength too that protected all of those people. As they take a break and Natalia heals his wounded back, Well suddenly hears a crowd of people. He looks up to see Eliza leading a group of villagers towards them. They happily call out to Well. Elsie and Delilah watch as Eliza engulfs Natalia in a hug. Later on, night sets in and the village gather once more. Well is again surrounded by thankful villagers. They call him their hero, grateful for saving them once more. As he eats, a large bowl of meat is placed in front of him, a man telling him not to hold back and eat up. Well thanks Darukan for the meat, but with tears streaming down his face, Darukan thanks Well for killing the big beast. Changing the subject, Darukan asks Well how his back wound was doing. Well tells him that it was fine since Natalia's healing magic already fixed it. With a concerned look, Darukan admits that he didn't think that beasts from the human kingdom would drift all the way to the Onifolk village. Well thinks about his words deeply, saying that they definitely needed to prepare something. Darukan laughs, asking Well that surely he didn't plan on handling everything on his own again. Well is confused. Darukan says that Well should let them fight too. Thanks to Well, the Onifolk tribe could finally look forward again. Grain had been so fired up that he hasn't left the forge in his quest to forge the ultimate blade for Well. Darukan adds that he should also teach their young ones how to fight beasts since they were dying to help him. Just as he says that, a group of starry-eyed young Onifolk come up to him. Well is rather overwhelmed that he of all people would teach them. Elsie comments that if they just relied on a human hero, their ancestors would curse them. As Well happily answers the younger Oni's questions about his training and fighting style, Natalia and Eliza eat at a neighboring table. Eliza says that Well really has blended in with the rest of the Onifolk. At her words, Natalia looks bashful as she agrees. Eliza seizes her moment and she suggests for Natalia to share their local brew with him. Natalia happily accepts. Eliza smiles as she watches Natalia stand and offer the drink to Well, who just as happily accepts it. To sit there, feeling as she was after facing down a beast and still being able to drink, Eliza was more than content. With a grin, she takes out a tankard and says that tonight she was having a drink too for the first time in ages. Heck yeah, drink up, Grandma. You earned it. Seeing everyone celebrating, Delilah smiles happily and climbs down from her seat next to Eliza. She skips towards Well, calling out to him. Well turns around to Delilah as she rummages through her pockets. She tells him that she had a request. Holding out a small flower, she asks that from now on she wants him to keep protecting everyone. And with a bright smile, she adds that she wanted him to marry Natalia and be her father. Oh, she went right out and said it. Like he was hit by a strike of lightning, Well is frozen and dumbfounded, not sure if he heard right. Natalia's whole face goes red, a smile stuck to her face. Eliza and Elsie are pleasantly surprised by the turn of events and the whole room goes quiet. In the next second, the villagers explode into celebration, saying that it was a brilliant idea. Darukan throws an arm around a paralyzed Well as the other villagers ask when the wedding is taking place, the others already wanting to prepare the feast. Well tries to get everyone to calm down, but Elsie cuts him off, informing him that Natalia had short-circuited, stuck on the idea of marriage with him. Well calls out to her, hesitantly asking if she was okay. Natalia flinches, her whole face still red. In a panic, she takes Delilah into her arms and quickly makes her escape, saying that her daughter had spoken out of turn. No, she did not, and you know it. Well calls out to her in a panic. However, someone calmly calls out to Well. He turns around to find Eliza. She holds up a bottle of their local brew in a cup. With a smile, she says that as the chieftain and as Natalia's mother, she wanted to ask him herself. Well exclaims in disbelief. She hands him the cup and urges him to let her pour for him. She starts off by saying that hearing his good deeds today, she had finally made her decision. Well is at a loss for words. Eliza says that Oni like them live long lives, about 200 years on average. But Wells probably noticed that there were very few elders in the village. Well takes a sip of his drink, remembering that he did notice that when he first arrived. Eliza tells him that when people hear demon-blooded Oni, they imagine strength. Kind of funny that they're called demon-blooded Oni when Oni already means demon, but I suppose Oni can still be considered different creatures. Eliza tells him that the truth was that they weren't made for war. Nobody is ever made for war, in my opinion. Sure, they were better at handling mana than humans, but not enough to survive constant battles. So most of them died before they ever grew old. But ever since Well had arrived, the faces of the villagers Eliza looked over had changed. To the Oni who lived in fear of the monsters, Well had given them hope. Well is struck silent for a moment before he says that he should be the one thanking them for taking him in when he was half dead. He tells her that all he could do was hunt beasts, which was only a part of a former hero's job, brother. That's because you were mostly being taken advantage of. Eliza mentions that Well had once said that he was abandoned by his kingdom. Well hesitantly agrees, but Eliza just smiles warmly. That was why Oni, like them, didn't ever want to let go of him. If he would have them, they wanted him to stay there forever. Her words touch Well, making his cheeks go red. Eliza adds for Well to also think about Natalia and Delilah. From his hip, Elsie tells him that Eliza herself was asking him, so he should make up his mind. Long after the Oni have passed out from their drinking, Well stays seated, still stressed. As Eliza had said, he thinks about Natalia and Delilah. Well thinks hard about Delilah's request. A marriage between Natalia and him? My bro is about to crash out with the amount of thinking he's doing. That is the end of Chapter 5. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.